This information is presented by Bluewater Auto Restoration. Welcome back. This is week 12 of the 2026 Bluewater Auto Restoration podcast. We release new podcasts every Saturday morning. So, jumping right into today's deep dive, I want to pose a question to you.
All right, lay it on me.
Why does a rusty, faded, just visibly deteriorating 1969 Mustang sometimes sell at auction for like $50,000 more than an identical Mustang sitting right next to it that has a flawless mirror finish, brand new paint job?
Yeah, it's wild, right? That $50,000 premium for rust, it's the perfect entry point for what we're talking about today.
Exactly. We are breaking down that bizarre economic reality. Our mission today is to explore buying versus building, the classic car restoration guide. We're parsing through industry guides, some restoration market analysis, and a few gearhead manifestos to help you figure out where you actually belong in this ecosystem.
Right, because you have to decide, are you destined for the garage, hunting for obscure parts every weekend, or should you just, open your wallet and buy your way straight into the driver's seat?
And it's not a small choice.
No, not at all. It highlights that the classic car market just doesn't operate on standard logic. Like, if you renovate a house, brand new plumbing and fresh drywall add value, right?
Sure, obviously.
But in the vintage car world, perfection can actually destroy value, while documented decay commands this massive premium. This tension between the sweat equity of building a car and the immediate gratification of buying one, it fundamentally dictates your lifestyle, your bank account, and basically your weekends for the next several years.
It really does, but I want to test that logic right out of the gate because before we can tell you to buy a finished car or build one from a rolling shell, we have to define what the end goal even is.
Right. What does restored actually mean?
Exactly. I was reading through the market analysis and the community is completely fractured on that word. It is a philosophical minefield. The data seems to divide the entire hobby into four distinct, often warring factions.
Warring is definitely the right word for it.
Let's start with the most extreme end of the spectrum, the survivor.
Oh, the purists. The survivor class is the purest, most rigid interpretation of automotive history out there. The defining rule here is that the vehicle must remain functionally and visually identical to the exact moment it rolled off the assembly line.
Regardless of how much time has passed.
Exactly. A half-century passes, doesn't matter. The judging criteria for these cars at major concours events are just staggering. Judges will literally use paint thickness meters to ensure the factory lacquer hasn't been touched or blended.
Wow, paint meters.
Yeah, and they look for original factory chalk marks on the firewall. If a factory line worker in, say, 1969 sneezed and left a run in the paint on the inner fender, correcting that paint run destroys the car's survivor status.
Wait, really? You can't fix a factory mistake?
Nope. External patina, so the fading, the slight surface rust, it's viewed as a sacred, unrepeatable document of history.
Okay, wait. I have a massive problem with that from a mechanical standpoint.
I figure you might.
I mean, I get the romanticism of an untouched time capsule. It's a museum exhibit, right? But practically speaking, metal degrades, rubber turns to dust.
It does.
So what happens when a 60-year-old starter motor simply gives up? You can't just leave a dead starter in the car if you intend to actually drive it across a show field.
Well, the strict survivor doctrine actually has a very specific, almost paradoxical workaround for that exact scenario.
I'm listening.
When an original component fails, the owner removes it and sends it out to a highly specialized rebuilder. The specialist guts the internal mechanics. They replace the copper windings, the brushes, the bearings with modern materials so it functions perfectly.
Okay.
But, and this is the key, they are under strict orders to leave the rusty, grease-stained exterior shell completely untouched. Then it just gets bolted back into the engine.
Okay, that is literally the ship of Theseus thought experiment playing out in real time under a hood.
Yeah, exactly.
If you replace every internal moving part of a starter with modern copper and steel, but you keep the crusty shell, is it still the original starter? To me, you aren't preserving history, you're preserving an illusion.
That is the exact argument the critics make.
Right, because you're driving a vehicle that is mechanically modern on the inside, but you're just wearing a disguise on the outside to satisfy a judging sheet. And beyond the starter, what about safety?
Oh, the safety debate is huge.
You're white-knuckling a 2-ton piece of metal down the highway, praying a brittle original suspension bushing from the 60s doesn't disintegrate at 60 miles an hour.
Yeah, the safety argument is the primary weapon used against the survivor class. The purists will counter that by saying, well, these cars aren't meant for highway cruising anyway. They are historical artifacts meant for preservation and like highly controlled exhibition.
Right, driving them on a trailer, basically.
Exactly. But you are hitting on the exact reason why the survivor class is incredibly small. Most enthusiasts actually want to drive their vehicles without fearing imminent structural failure.
Which makes sense.
Right, and that desire to actually use the machine brings us to the largest demographic in the market, which is the functional driver.
Now, the functional driver makes so much more sense to me. This feels like the pragmatic middle ground. If the survivor is the historical artifact behind velvet ropes, the functional driver is the car you actually take to get ice cream on a Sunday.
Spot on. The parameters for a functional driver are far more relaxed. The owner wants the car to be visually striking and mechanically reliable.
So they don't care about a paint run from 1969.
Not at all. If the paint is fading, they will strip it and spray a beautiful new coat of modern urethane clear coat. They will rip out the cracked vinyl interior and install fresh upholstery.
Thank goodness.
And when that alternator dies, they don't rebuild the rusty original. They just buy a fresh, rebuilt original-style alternator right off the shelf.
So they aren't losing sleep over whether a serial number stamped on the water pump matches the vehicle identification number on the chassis.
Exactly. Well, I should clarify. The market absolutely values numbers matching cars, but the functional driver owner prioritizes usability over matching stamps.
Right, they want to drive it.
The crucial distinction here is that while they're replacing parts, they are retaining the factory spirit. So they are upgrading to dual-circuit master cylinders so the brakes don't fail, but they aren't installing digital dashboard clusters or glowing LED underglow.
Yeah, that would be a different category entirely.
Right. The car looks, sounds, and feels like it belongs in its original era, just functioning at its absolute best.
I love that. Retaining the spirit while ditching the lethal 1960s braking technology.
Yeah, stopping is generally preferred.
Highly recommended. But then we arrive at the third faction, and I have to admit, this is where I get really enthusiastic.
I had a feeling you'd like this group.
The industry analysis provides some wild case studies on the resto-mod or the radical custom. Let's say I find a pristine, stock 1965 Chevelle.
Okay, classic.
Right, but I decide I don't care about its factory history at all. I top 2 inches off the roofline. I drop in a massive, fuel-injected, big block crate engine.
Oh, wow, going all out.
Oh, yeah. I spray the entire body in a blinding metal flake orange, cut the rear wheel wells out, and install 10-inch wide rear tires on modern magnesium wheels.
You've just described a complete aesthetic and mechanical transformation.
It sounds awesome.
It does. And to the general public, that metal flake Chevelle might look like the absolute pinnacle of a restored car because every single bolt is shiny, the paint is flawless, and the engine bay is pristine.
Right, it looks brand new.
But within the collector car market, that vehicle is definitively not a restoration. It is a radical custom. And the friction between this group and the purists is intense.
I can imagine.
Oh, survivor advocates often view resto-modders as vandals, who are literally destroying finite historical artifacts.
Vandals. That's hard.
It is. While the resto-modders view the purists as elitist museum curators, who have completely forgotten that cars were built to be driven hard.
I mean, I see the purist argument, but if I'm spending my own money, I want a car that can merge onto a modern interstate without terrifying me. The milder version of this is the true resto-mod, right? Where you keep the nostalgic factory look on the outside, maybe a factory paint color and original chrome, but underneath, you rip out the primitive suspension and bolt in modern independent coilovers, rack and pinion steering, and disc brakes.
Yeah, it's a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Exactly.
And the resto-mod is actually the fastest growing segment in the auction world right now, precisely because it bridges the gap between vintage aesthetics and modern reliability.
Best of both worlds.
But it still entirely abandons the concept of originality. Which brings us to the fourth and final faction, the absolute polar opposite of the resto-mod.
The over-restored museum piece.
Yes.
Now, this category is fascinating to me because it implies that a car can be too perfect.
It absolutely can be.
The industry guides detail how these builders obsessively hunt for NOS parts, new old stock. So these are parts manufactured by the factory back in the 60s or 70s, but they were never installed. They've just been sitting in a cardboard box on a dealership shelf for 50 years.
Yeah, and NOS parts are the holy grail for this group. However, the purists from our first group, the survivor fans, will argue that assembling a car from NOS parts deviates from true originality.
Wait, why? They're factory parts.
Because those specific parts didn't roll down the assembly line on that specific chassis.
Oh, wow. That is incredibly pedantic.
It is. But the real hallmark of the over-restored car isn't just the parts. It's the craftsmanship. These vehicles are meticulously assembled by master craftsmen whose standards vastly exceed anything the original factory ever produced.
Right, because a factory in Detroit in 1968 was churning out hundreds of cars a shift.
Exactly.
The line workers were slamming doors on, adjusting hinges with rubber mallets, and spraying paint as fast as humanly possible. There were massive panel gaps, orange peel in the paint, sloppy welds. It was mass production.
Right, it was just a product to them. But the modern restorer, they will spend 600 hours block sanding the primer just to ensure the body panels are laser straight.
600 hours on primer, that's insane.
It is. They gap the doors to millimeter perfection. The resulting car is an incredible, flawless work of art, but it is a historical fiction. A 1968 factory car never looked that good.
Right, it's an idealized version of history.
Exactly. And the real tragedy of the over-restored condition is that because the owner has invested hundreds of thousands of dollars achieving this absolute perfection, the car can never be driven.
Because of rock chips.
Yes. A single rock chip from the highway ruins the investment, so they just become static sculptures.
That breaks my heart a little bit. So as you're listening to this, I want you to mentally place yourself on the spectrum. Are you hunting down chalk marks to build an untouched survivor? Are you trying to build a flawless, undrivable, over-restored sculpture?
Or do you want a resto-mod that handles like a modern sports car?
Right. Or are you just looking for a functional driver to cruise in on weekends? Identifying your destination is the mandatory first step here. Because once you know what you want the car to be, you have to decide how you are going to acquire it.
And that leads us into the deepest, most romanticized path in the entire gearhead universe.
Building it yourself from a pile of parts.
Yes. The concept of the build carries immense emotional weight in the automotive community. It is a grueling, multi-year commitment.
Not for the faint of heart.
No, definitely not. The Gearhead manifestos focus heavily on two specific psychological drivers that compel people to choose this path. The first is total creative control, and the second is a concept known as mechanical transparency.
I have to say, mechanical transparency is a brilliant term.
Isn't it?
It essentially means the machine has no secrets from you. When you buy a used car, you are inherently adopting mysteries. But when you build a car from a bare metal chassis, you are the author of its anatomy.
You know the exact routing of every single wire in the harness. You know which specific shim was used to align the transmission bell housing.
Right.
You know exactly how many layers of epoxy primer are protecting the inner fender from rust. You possess an encyclopedic knowledge of that specific vehicle.
Let's put that into a real-world scenario so people can really grasp it. Imagine you're on a road trip.
Okay, classic road trip.
You are 300 miles from home, it's pitch black outside, and suddenly the engine sputters, backfires, and dies on the shoulder of the highway.
Nightmare scenario.
Total nightmare. If you bought that car finished from a stranger, you are popping the hood, staring at a tangle of custom wiring, and completely guessing at the previous owner's logic. You are helpless.
Yeah, you're calling a tow truck immediately.
Exactly. But if you built that car, you know instantly that you used a slightly undersized ground wire on the electric fuel pump 3 years ago because you were rushing to make a car show.
You know exactly what failed.
Right. You know exactly where that wire is tucked under the chassis. You slide under, fix the ground, and you're back on the road in 10 minutes.
That level of self-reliance is incredibly empowering.
It really is.
Furthermore, the build process isn't just about assembly, it's about the acquisition of the parts. For builders of rare or obscure models, the hunt is a massive dopamine driver. The industry guides cite examples of enthusiasts spending years, literally years, tracking down highly specific single-year components.
Oh, the hunt is legendary. The texts list some incredibly niche examples of this. Imagine trying to find an original distributor cap for a 1960 Dodge Dart.
Good luck with that.
Right. Or spending every weekend scouring swap meets and online forums for a functioning master cylinder for a Plymouth Valiant.
It becomes a second job.
It does. What about hunting down the specific side mirrors for a 1970 Plymouth Fury? Or a structurally sound gas tank for a Dodge Polara? To an outsider, spending 9 months agonizing over a piece of stamped steel sounds like a psychiatric disorder.
It really does sound crazy to normal people.
But to a builder, it's a crusade. When that rusted, incredibly rare Polara gas tank finally arrives on your doorstep, it feels like unearthing a holy relic.
And the culmination of that crusade, the hours of hunting, the welding, the wiring, it translates directly into a profound pride of ownership.
Oh, absolutely.
Unveiling a completed build at a local car show, knowing that every single millimeter of that vehicle bears your fingerprints, offers a level of satisfaction that simply cannot be purchased with a checkbook. The phrase, "I built that," is the ultimate currency in gearhead culture.
It's the ultimate mic drop. Yeah, I did the engine swap in my driveway. I stitched the interior upholstery myself.
Right.
It commands deep respect.
It really does.
But we have to pull back the curtain here because the manifestos dedicate entire chapters to the dark side of this process.
Yeah, it's not all sunshine and rainbows.
It is not all triumphant engine revs and polishing chrome.
No, the literature is very clear about a psychological trap known as the Project Blues, which frequently leads to a state called garage limbo.
Garage limbo, that sounds ominous.
It is, and this usually begins with a phenomenon called scope creep.
Scope creep, the silent killer of projects. Let me use an analogy here for the listeners.
Go for it.
It's like finding a small water stain on your living room drywall. You cut a tiny hole just to fix a leaking pipe. While you're in there, you notice the wooden studs look a little soft.
Oh, no.
So you tear down the whole wall. Then you see the foundation has a crack. Suddenly you aren't fixing a pipe anymore. You are rebuilding the entire structural foundation of your house while your family lives in a hotel.
That is the exact mechanism of garage limbo. A builder decides to pull the engine just to replace a leaky rear main seal.
Seems simple enough.
Right, but once the engine is out, they look at the empty engine bay and think, well, the paint is chipping. I should strip and repaint the firewall.
Makes sense while you're in there.
Exactly. But while stripping the firewall, they find a spot of rust on the frame rail. Before they realize what has happened, they have completely disassembled the entire vehicle down to the bare chassis.
Oh, man.
A one-run repair has escalated into a 5-year frame-off restoration.
And then reality hits. You have a demanding job, maybe you have kids, your budget gets tight, the momentum just dies.
And the car ceases to be a vehicle. It becomes a skeletal chassis sitting on jack stands, surrounded by hundreds of plastic baggies filled with labeled bolts occupying your entire garage.
Just mocking you.
Exactly. The psychological weight of walking past that stalled project every single day is immense. The literature points out that this constant visual reminder of failure and uncompleted work can actually destroy a person's passion for the hobby entirely.
It's like adopting a wildly untrained, hyperactive puppy.
That's a great way to look at it.
The bond you eventually form with that dog will be incredibly deep because you survived the trenches together. You endured the chewed-up furniture, the sleepless nights, the grueling training, but it demands a staggering, almost unreasonable amount of your life.
Right.
And sometimes, if we're being brutally honest, you don't want the trenches. You just want a dog that already knows how to fetch so you can go play in the park today.
Yeah, and if the prospect of garage limbo terrifies you,
Yeah.
if you want the dog that already knows how to fetch, the alternative is the bot path.
Which is incredibly tempting.
You bypass the build entirely and purchase a finished, turnkey classic car.
Let's thoroughly examine the bot side of the equation. Because if building a car is about mechanical intimacy and emotional investment, buying a finished car is a masterclass in immediate gratification and surprisingly harsh economic reality.
The economics of buying a finished classic car operate on a principle the restoration market analysis calls the restorer's paradox.
Okay, the restorer's paradox.
This is the most crucial financial rule in the hobby. Are you ready?
Lay it on me.
It almost always costs significantly more money to build a car to a specific standard than it does to buy a car already finished to that exact same standard.
Wait, let me challenge that because it violates basic financial common sense.
It really seems to, yes.
In almost every other aspect of life, doing the labor yourself is the budget hack. You cook at home to avoid the restaurant markup. You paint your own living room to save $2,000 on a contractor. Why on earth is classic car restoration the exact opposite? Let's break down the math on this paradox.
It comes down to the complete depreciation of labor in the collector market.
Okay.
When a builder spends 2,000 hours cutting out rust, welding in new floor pans, blocking the paint, and rebuilding the transmission, they're investing massive amounts of time.
Years of their life.
Exactly. But when they go to sell that car, the market refuses to pay them an hourly rate for that garage time. When you buy a restored car, you are acquiring the previous owner's blood, sweat, and thousands of hours of labor at an extreme discount. often pennies on the dollar.
Because the market only values the finished asset, not the suffering required to create it.
Precisely that. Furthermore, buying a finished car allows you to completely bypass the inflation of parts.
Oh, that's a huge point.
It is. If you embark on a 10-year build, the cost of raw materials will escalate dramatically while your car sits in pieces. The price of professional chrome plating, high-quality authentic vinyl upholstery, or modern fuel-injected crate engines might double over a decade.
Yeah, inflation is brutal.
But the previous owner absorbed all of those inflated costs and supply chain headaches for you.
So purely looking at a spreadsheet, buying a finished car is the ultimate financial cheat code.
On paper, yes.
But the manifestos point out a massive hurdle regarding how you finance that cheat code. If you buy a finished, turnkey 1969 Camaro, you need complete capital liquidity. You have to write a check for $60,000 today.
And that upfront capital requirement locks many enthusiasts out of the bought path entirely.
Whereas with a build, you are essentially financing the project with your own labor spread out over years.
Exactly, it's piecemeal.
You buy a rusted roller for $4,000. 8 months later, you save up $600 for a new carburetor. A year after that, you buy a disc brake conversion kit. You are trading time for cash flow.
That slow bleed of cash makes the build accessible. But we must address the massive risk associated with dropping $60,000 on a finished car. You suggested earlier that buying's a cheat code, but the industry guides offer a severe warning about this.
Okay, what's the warning?
Buying a finished car is arguably the highest stakes gamble in the hobby.
See, my issue with calling it a cheat code is the lack of transparency. When you buy a finished car, you are basically putting a blindfold on.
You really are.
You are entirely trusting your physical safety and your bank account to the craftsmanship of a stranger you just met on the internet.
The guides refer to this as the lipstick on a pig scenario.
Lipstick on a pig.
Perfect. It is dangerously easy for an unscrupulous seller, or even just an incompetent builder, to hide catastrophic structural rot and lethal mechanical flaws under a $20,000 high-gloss paint job.
A shiny disaster. You walk around the car, the paint reflects like a mirror, the chrome is blinding, you hand over the check.
You're thrilled.
Right. Then you get it home, put it on a lift, and realize the floor pans are made of recycled street signs held together with roofing tar and cheap Bondo.
Oh, I've seen it happen.
Or worse, you dive under the dashboard to fix a flickering gauge and discover a custom wiring nightmare.
The wiring is usually where the shortcuts are most evident. Oh yeah. You find a rat's nest of unmarked, solid color wires spliced together with cheap household electrical tape and wire nuts. A single short circuit in that mess could burn the car to the ground.
That is terrifying.
If you purchase a finished car without commissioning a deeply invasive professional pre-purchase inspection where a third-party expert puts the car on a lift and uses a magnet to check for body filler, you could face absolute financial ruin.
Because if you buy the lipstick on a pig, you don't just lose the premium you paid for a finished car. You now have to pay thousands of dollars to tear down and rebuild a car you thought was already done.
Exactly.
You end up paying for the restoration twice.
It is the most extensive mistake a gearhead can make. And this brings us to a critical inflection point in the data.
Okay.
Beyond the raw economics and the risk of hidden rust, the industry guides emphasize that the build versus buy decision must be filtered through a ruthless assessment of your personal reality.
Your personal reality. What does that cover?
Specifically, your technical talent, the physical space you own, and how you value your time.
Let's start with talent and tools, because YouTube gives people a lot of false confidence.
Oh, so much false confidence.
You watch a 10-minute time-lapse video of a guy restoring a fender, and you think, I could do that this weekend.
And you definitely can't.
Right. The expertise required for a full frame-off build is staggering. You can't just be a parts replacer. You have to become a structural welder, a fluid dynamics expert for the fuel system, an automotive electrician, and an auto body sculptor.
The skills are highly specialized. Take welding, for example.
Yeah.
The structural integrity of the chassis relies on your ability to fuse metal. If you are welding in new frame rails, you are likely using a MIG or TIG welder.
Which takes years to master.
TIG welding requires immense coordination, feeding a filler rod with one hand, manipulating a torch with the other, while controlling the heat output with the foot pedal. If your welds lack penetration, the car could literally tear itself apart under torque.
That is a scary thought. And even if you possess the sheer willpower to learn TIG welding, you hit the infrastructure wall.
The physical space.
Exactly. The guides highlight the hidden costs of the workspace. You cannot restore a classic car in a cramped one-car apartment garage using a basic socket set from a big box hardware store.
No. The physical footprint and equipment required for a build are vast. You need a 220-volt electrical service just to run a decent welder or a high-capacity air compressor.
Most homes don't just have that ready to go in the garage.
Right. And if you plan to paint the car yourself, you need professional-grade HVLP spray guns, moisture traps for your airlines, and a ventilated, dust-free environment. You are essentially building a small-scale manufacturing facility before you even touch the car.
Just to get started.
The tools alone can cost thousands of dollars.
Compare that to the bot path. If you purchase that functional driver we talked about earlier, your infrastructure needs drop to almost zero.
Absolutely zero.
Your maintenance toolkit consists of a good floor jack, some jack stands, a wrench set for oil changes, and maybe a timing light. It's the difference between running a hospital and just knowing basic first aid.
That's a perfect analogy.
But the guides pose a psychological question that I found even more profound than the tool requirements.
Yeah, it's the dichotomy of time.
Yeah.
The fundamental question is, do you view time spent in the garage as tactile therapy, or will it become a source of crushing guilt?
This stopped me in my tracks when I read it. How do you view the physical act of working?
Right.
If you have a high-stress digital job where you stare at screens all day, the solitude of the garage might be your sanctuary.
A place to decompress.
Exactly. Smelling the ozone from the welder, feeling the grit of the sandpaper, spending 4 hours meticulously rebuilding a carburetor on your workbench, that isn't lost time. That is the entire point of the hobby for you. The build is your therapy.
If the process brings you peace, then garage limbo isn't a threat. It's just a long-term therapeutic engagement.
Right. It doesn't matter if it takes 10 years.
Exactly. However, the reality check comes when we examine the demographics of people who attempt these builds. Many are established professionals with highly demanding careers, frequent travel schedules, and young families.
Right. Your time is already maxed out. You have maybe 3 hours of free time a week.
If you're lucky.
In that scenario, that skeletal chassis sitting on jack stands in your garage ceases to be a sanctuary. It becomes a glowing neon monument to your lack of free time.
Yes, it just looms over you.
Every time you pull into your driveway after an exhausting day at work, the project is just sitting there silently judging you for not making progress.
It transitions from a hobby into an emotional burden. The vehicle actually becomes a source of stress.
I think of it like having a massive 5,000-piece jigsaw puzzle permanently taking up your entire dining room table.
Oh, that sounds incredibly annoying.
Right. If you are a puzzle person, it is a joy to walk by, sip your coffee, find one edge piece, and slowly chip away at it over 6 months. It relaxes your brain.
Sure.
But if you don't inherently love the tedious process of puzzle solving, it's just a chaotic, stressful mess occupying prime real estate in your home, constantly reminding you of an unfinished task.
That analogy perfectly captures the psychological trap. If you are not a puzzle person when it comes to mechanics, undertaking a multi-year build will completely drain your enthusiasm for vintage cars.
It'll ruin the hobby for you.
Exactly. In that specific scenario, writing the check for a finished vehicle is the only logical choice to ensure you actually get to experience the joy of driving.
Makes total sense.
But before we leave the economics, there is one final reality check we must cover. Resale value and the myth of the classic car as an investment.
Cars are notoriously terrible investments.
Historically, yes.
But the classic car market exists in this strange, speculative bubble where vehicles can act as appreciating assets.
They can, but the market heavily favors the bought side of our equation when it comes to safety of investment.
Okay, how so?
If you purchase a highly documented, restored car, especially those coveted matching numbers vehicles we mentioned earlier, where the factory engine block and transmission serial numbers match the chassis VIN, you are buying a relatively stable asset. The collector market prizes originality and verified provenance above almost anything else.
Because there's a finite supply of matching numbers cars. Once they're gone, they're gone.
Exactly.
But what about the builders? If I spend 5 years building a car, can I flip it for a profit to justify the time?
The data shows that building for profit is exceptionally difficult. The margins are razor thin, and your execution must be flawless.
So it's not like flipping a house.
Not at all. If you start with a highly desirable rare model and you meticulously restore it using authentic OEM parts or high-quality reproductions, you might break even or see a small return.
Break even! After all that work.
Yeah. For the vast majority of garage builders, it is a massive financial loss. We return to that depreciation of labor we talked about.
The math is brutal. You buy a rusted shell for $5,000. You sink $30,000 into engine parts, paint, and interior kits. You invest 2,000 hours of your life. You
Right.
have 35 grand and half a decade invested. And when you finally list it for sale, the market tells you the car is only worth $25,000.
Yep, happens every day.
You didn't just lose 10 grand in cash. You essentially paid the next owner to take your 2,000 hours of labor for free.
Which is why the industry guides universally caution against entering a build strictly to flip it for profit unless you run a professional restoration shop with dealer pricing on parts and a highly efficient workflow.
Okay, so we've painted a stark, almost intimidating binary here.
We really have.
On one side, you plunge into the deep end of a multi-year sanity testing build that requires specialized welding skills and threatens you with garage limbo.
And on the other side, you drain your savings account to write a massive check, taking a huge gamble that the finished car isn't hiding a rusted frame under shiny paint.
Right, but what if you, the listener, are completely torn? What if you want the tactile joy of turning wrenches, but you don't want your car stuck on jack, stands for a decade?
Fortunately, the Gearhead Manifestos outline a third, highly pragmatic strategy that sits perfectly between the two extremes.
Oh, good. A lifeline.
It is often referred to as the middle ground strategy or the rolling project.
The rolling project. This feels like the ultimate compromise.
It is the most realistic entry point for the average enthusiast. The core concept of the rolling project is purchasing a vehicle that is approximately 80% finished.
Let's define exactly what that 80% looks like mechanically, because, one person's 80% is another person's disaster.
Fair point. In this context, 80% means the catastrophic heavy lifting has already been completed by someone else.
So no structural welding.
Exactly. The structural rust has been repaired, the engine has been rebuilt, it starts reliably, and it doesn't overheat. The transmission shifts smoothly. The braking system is safe.
Okay, so it's solid.
Very solid. Aesthetically, the major bodywork and paint are done. It might not be a flawless, conquerors-winning paint job, but it looks fantastic from 20 feet away.
So the crucial point is that you can buy this car on a Friday afternoon, wake up on Saturday morning, turn the key, and immediately drive it to a weekend cruise-in.
You get the instant gratification.
The smells, the sounds, the wind in your hair.
Exactly. You bypass the depression of a stalled project. But the car still needs your specific touch. That remaining 20% is where you build your sweat equity.
So what does that 20% look like?
Perhaps the interior is entirely bare metal, and you need to spend a winter installing sound deadening, routing the wiring for a stereo, stretching the headliner, and bolting in new seats.
Or maybe the car runs great, but the suspension is sloppy and terrifying in corners. So you spend a few weekends upgrading the sway bars, installing modern shocks, and dialing in the steering geometry.
Yes, or you spend months hunting down those rare trim pieces to finish the exterior.
This approach completely mitigates the risk of garage limbo.
It does, because the projects you are tackling, installing door panels, upgrading shocks, swapping a carburetor, are weekend jobs.
They have a clear finish line.
Exactly. If life gets incredibly busy and you have to abandon the garage for 2 months, the car isn't a disassembled skeleton blocking your driveway. It's a fully assembled vehicle. You can still open the garage door, start the engine, and go for a therapeutic drive.
It's the Goldilocks zone.
Yeah.
It allows you to bleed a little over the engine bay, to learn how the electrical system works, and to build that deep, intimate connection with the machine.
But you avoid the soul-crushing overwhelm of a total frame-off restoration.
And you avoid the massive upfront capital risk of buying a concours-level finished car.
It really is the smartest way to enter the hobby.
So what does this all mean for you? We've explored the obsessive purity of the survivor class, the raw performance of the radical custom, and the flawless fiction of the over-restored museum piece.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We've weighed the profound pride and mechanical transparency of the build against the grueling reality of garage limbo. And we've broken down the restorer's paradox and the terrifying financial risks of buying a finished car.
So it all comes down to a choice.
Exactly. To wrap this up, the choice between buying and building is incredibly personal. A classic car is, undeniably, a depreciating asset in terms of the sheer physical effort, the bleeding knuckles, and the money you will pour into it.
No question about that.
But it is a wildly appreciating asset in terms of the memories it creates and the skills it teaches you.
That is the crux of the entire hobby. You have to look at your life, your garage space, and your patience level and decide whether you want those core memories to be forged under the hood, wrestling with a rusted bolt, or behind the wheel, carving through a canyon road.
Remember to visit the Bluewater.CA website.
And a quick reminder, our podcasts are available on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or SoundCloud.
Before we sign off, there is one final, highly provocative thought I want to leave you with, straight from the deepest philosophical debates in the restoration community.
Oh, this is a good one. We talked about how the joy of this hobby is connecting with a bygone era. But let's say you take a classic 1969 shell. You add a modern computer-controlled 500 horsepower crate engine.
A total beast.
You install custom electronic fuel injection, a modern independent suspension, satellite radio, and digital gauges just to make the car drive reliably in today's stop-and-go traffic.
Right, making it livable.
At what exact point does that classic car cease to be a piece of history and simply become a modern car wearing a very expensive vintage costume?
Wow. A modern car in a vintage costume. It's the ship of Theseus all over again, but this time it's wearing a muscle car suit.
It really is.
It brings us right back to the beginning. Whether you were staring at a bare chassis on jack stands holding a welding torch, or looking at a gleaming, fuel-injected masterpiece cruising down the street, well, the machine is only half the story.
The rest of the story is the decisions you made to get it there.
Exactly. Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next week.